Hello and welcome to Just One More Watch. If this is your first time here, a special hello just for you. My name is Jody, I love watches and I would love it if you would subscribe to the channel by hitting the big button that says subscribe on it. This isn't necessarily going to be a regular video today, it's not really a top-down review. I will show you some top-down review style footage and dimensions etc of the watch a bit later on. This is more a chronological narrative investigation, my attempt at long journalism as I try and answer the question on the thumbnail today: is this a fake Seagull 1963? This is the third video that I've made about the Seagull 1963, or is it? Have I yet to make a video about the 1963? Is this watch on my wrist a Seagull 1963, or is it something else? Is it a fake? Is it a copy? Is it a reproduction? And does any of that actually matter? Not an easy subject, this one. There are a number of different opinions and I've been researching on Watch You Seek and various forums and threads, and I've had some chats with industry professionals who actually sell these watches as well in my attempt to come to a reasonable conclusion. Now I'm going to use a lot of screenshots, screencasts, pictures etc today. I'll try and credit them verbally, but I will also leave links to these in the description of the video in case you want to do your own investigations. Let's flip the camera and get on with it. Now it should be noted before I go on that some of this is a little bit murky and vague. There's conflicting information around, so I've tried to kind of come up with my best guess at how all of this adds up and put it into a relatively digestible narrative, and I'll let you know where there's some doubt regarding figures and dates as I go on. So is this a fake Seagull 1963? And why even ask the question, and where does the issue or confusion lie? I guess that to answer the question about my own watch, the real question today is there such a thing as one clearly identifiable, genuine Seagull 1963? And if there is, where does one get it from and how much does it cost? And if there is such a thing as one genuine Seagull 1963, what does that mean for the plethora of other watches sold as Seagull 1963s that then become clearly something other than the one genuine Seagull 1963? If you look online for Seagull 1963s, you'll see a fairly broad selection of watches, all looking quite similar, all containing the same movement, the Seagull ST1901, a manual wind, biocompact, dual register, 30-minute column wheel chronograph. When you begin to look more closely at these watches, all on the surface they look quite similar, but you begin to notice more and more differences across the range. There are two different sizes for a start. There's 38 and 42mm versions, and to confuse matters even further, there appears to be a new third size, a 40mm version, released just within the last 2 weeks. There are versions sold with acrylic crystal, with mineral crystal, and with sapphire crystal. There are panda dials, there are reverse panda dials, there's even a DLC version, and there are a bunch of other watches that look quite similar but have different dial layouts altogether. There appear to be differences in packaging, with some being sold in metal tins, some being sold in paper boxes, and some in wooden boxes. And there appears to be a vast difference in price too, a factor of 2 really. Even if you look at what's available on AliExpress within the same sale space, they start at $160 to more than double that. So clearly then there is a question to be answered today, hopefully, and to do that let's go back a few years. Let's go back to discuss the original watch from 1963 or thereabouts anyway, that this watch is made in commemoration of. Albert Kaminsky is a Baltic watch blogger and reviewer, and he's written a great article on the history of the ST19 movement, because if we look back at the movement it brings us neatly to the watch. Now back in the 1940s and 50s there were 3 main Swiss companies making mechanical chronographs. They were Lemania, Valjoux and Venus. Venus were trying to raise funds to research and manufacture their new 188 caliber, and they tried to do so by selling the rights and the tools to one of their proven but already by that point outdated calibers, the 175. They tried to sell it to the Soviets but they had their own design. Enter the Chinese. Now we're right in the middle of the Mao era here, and at the time the PRC was looking to develop a domestic chronograph for the People's Liberation Army Air Force, a project dubbed Project 304 or D304. 1 was the Navy, 2 referred to the Army, and 3 referred to Air Force, hence 304. Now they couldn't buy one from the Soviets at the time because of the Sino-Soviet split, but hey, the Swiss have never had any problem doing business with, shall we say, dubious regimes, have they? So the deal was done and the Tianjin watch factory assumed the rights to the Venus 175. Tianjin, by the way, is less than 100 kilometers from Beijing on China's north coast. Watchmakers there set about modifying the movement for their purposes, adding 2 joules to make it 19 joules rather than the original 17 of the Venus 75. So Project D304 was commissioned in 1961. A number of prototypes, thought to be around 30, were released for testing in 1963. They were approved, or at least one of them was approved, and around 1400 to 1700, as I said, some of the details, some of the figures are a little vague, but around 1500-ish original units were manufactured in 1965, and these dates are quite important. Fast forward to the 1990s and Mao is long gone. The Tianjin watch factory is promoted to a national level enterprise and becomes Tianjin Seagull Corporation. Indeed, it was floated on the stock market in the early 2000s. As I said, Mao was long gone. Now, like the rest of the world, they were affected by the quartz crisis and ceased making mechanical watches in 1992. A decision which was reversed 5 years later in 1997, and in the 2000s they began to get all nostalgic and, like watch brands around the world, looked to their back catalogue for inspiration. Now, one watch that Seagull did re-release quite recently was a reissue of the issued D304, if you see what I mean. As you can see here, it's quite different from the watch that we know as the Seagull 1963, with Dauphine hands, quite different indices and a different look overall. These were reissued in a limited run of 10,000 numbered, but I have seen suggestions that they may or may not actually have produced and sold all 10,000 of them, because no one in the West anyway has seen a number over 2,000. Regardless, they're now sold out, as you can see here from the Seagull website. So this reissue was a reissue of the 1965 production watch, and it was clearly quite different from the watch that we know and love today as the 1963. Now, at this point, the chronology gets a little bit fuzzy. We're heading back a few years. Forum chatter about the Seagull 1963 I've found as far back as 2006 and certainly into early 2007. Here it is, the new Seagull 1963, with photos of the watch that we would all recognise. Now, if you're paying attention to the dates, this suggests that the watch that we all recognise has its origins amongst a batch of varied prototypes that were released for testing and approval in 1963, as opposed to the D304 that was eventually released and reissued in 1965. Indeed, here's a photo on East Watch Review of a chap called Lee Wei's stunning prototype from 1963. Note the Star Trek style logo under the 12 and the text in English above the 6. Here are another couple of photos from a Chinese watch museum of other prototypes, including a black dial version. So perhaps some of the variants discussed earlier on, the pandas and so on, aren't quite so inauthentic. So at some point in the mid-2000s, somebody started producing the watch that we now recognise as the Seagull 1963. It had a solid case back, 19 joule on the dial, 2 lines of text. Now, there are huge numbers of forum threads from the late noughties about the watch, and it had clearly hit the mainstream by 2011, as seen here by the watch's inclusion in this Worn and Wound article. Again, links to all of this in the description of the video. Now, interestingly, the Worn and Wound article features a watch with a display case back, with a prominent red star obscuring the movement. Now, I bought my first 63 from Watch Unique in the Netherlands, I think it was in 2016, and I had the option to spec that case back, the see-through case back, but I declined because A, I'm a bit tight and it was an extra €30, and B, I didn't see the point of a display case back which obscures most of the movement, and C, there is an argument that a solid case back is more authentic. Now, I'm reliably informed from an industry source who shall remain nameless that a former employee of Seagull Hong Kong called Thomas decided to leave the employ of Seagull and set up his own factory, I guess with the approval of his former masters. He's the man who now produces most of the variants, the pandas, the 42s, etc., that are sold by many of the third-party retailers around the world today. This dated roughly 2013. Now, there is also a chap in amongst all of this called HK Ed, who's a big deal on the forums, and than 1/3 of EMG watches. Now, I've reviewed several EMG watches on the channel. Ed has been making his own versions of the 1963 for years. I guess you could call them interpretations, with different colours and crucially the old Star Trek style logo on the dial. Again, there's an argument that these ones have an authenticity that the official in inverted comma ones don't. So the waters are muddy and clearly have been muddy for some time, which rather brings us back to the earlier question. In 2020, is there an identifiable, genuine Seagull 1963? And I think that there is. Have a look at this one on the AliExpress website from the Seagull official store. Now, before you scream that everything on Ali is a fake, this is the $399 Seagull 1963 from Sea-Gull that I mentioned earlier. It's sold wrapped in plastic with a QR code and a serial number on the back out of a run of 5,500. I believe the model number is 819.17.1963. But these were only re-released in 2018, so there's only been an official Sea-Gull model available for the last 2 years. Perhaps some of the earlier variants in the mid-2000s did come from the Sea-Gull factory in Tianjin. There's suggestions that perhaps they were made for them under license elsewhere. Regardless, I think that today, as far as I can discern, if you want to buy something as close to being as genuine as possible, whatever that means, that's the one you buy. It's made by Sea-Gull, the makers of the original watch. It's 38mm, it's got an acrylic crystal, and it has the ST1901 manual wind movement based on the Venus 75 that powered the original watches in 1963 and 1965. So where does that leave everything else, including my own watch? Well, according to the official Seagull shop on AliExpress, they're all fakes, as you can see in this picture. However, do you think that Sea-Gull are unaware that there are seemingly many people making watches that look rather similar to theirs and contain movements which they sell them in the first place? I suspect they are. I suspect that the vast majority of watches in the world today that we regard as Seagull 1963s were not made by Sea-Gull, but with tacit approval elsewhere, or at least without the disapproval that would deem them to be regarded as fakes. There is a suggestion that even the mid-noughties versions, the original reissues, if you see what I mean, were made by a third party under license rather than by the Tianjin factory itself. And what about all the watches sold between, say, 2007 and 2017, including the one that I bought from Watch Unique? Could it be considered an inverted commas fake before Sea-Gull released their genuine version? Perhaps the 2018 official reissue was an attempt to get back into the market that had expanded considerably since the official versions back in the mid-noughties. Perhaps the issue is one of nomenclature. Watches like mine should be regarded as 1963s or prototype 63 reissues rather than Seagulls, because despite the ST1901 movement in them, they're not genuine Sea-Gulls. So I guess then, as consumers, we have a choice. We can buy a watch from Sea-Gull and enjoy the connection to the original manufacturer, and probably also the best version of the ST1901 movement. We can buy from HK Ed, which may actually be closer in look and spirit to one of the prototypes from 1963. We can buy a 42mm or a Panda if that's what we like the look of, or we can buy a watch from one of the seemingly hundreds of vendors able to sell them on AliExpress for around $160, getting the look but not necessarily getting the real deal that now costs $400. So there you have it, or do you have it? I guess this is very much up to the individual today to take from all of this information what they will. Is this a Seagull? No, it is not a Seagull. If you want a Sea-Gull 1963, then you need to buy it from the Sea-Gull official store, and you'll be paying top dollar for it. You'll be paying $400 USD for the privilege of owning an original Seagull 1963 reproduction, if you see what I mean. The watch on my wrist is something else. I would regard it as a Seagull 1963. I think they have sold so many more of these than of those that this is what most people will regard today as a Seagull 1963. Rightly or wrongly, I can see kind of pros and cons of both. It's clearly not as original as it would be had you bought it from Seagull, but it does have the same movement in it. But there are various advantages to buying the Seagull 1963, those being the price. It's likely to be less than half the price of the Sea-Gull. You can get sapphire, you can get acrylic, you can get a 42. There are various different colorways as well you can choose from, a display case back if you do want to see the ST19. So it comes down to you, I guess. How much money are you prepared to spend? Because there's a big price gulf. Do you like the colors? Do you want sapphire? Or do you want to have something that is as close to the original as is possible currently, made by exactly the same manufacturer that made the originals? Not easy. Like I said, it's a bit Inception today. There's a good few layers to this, but I hope at least this has been an interesting video, an interesting investigation into what I think is a fantastic watch regardless. Thanks for watching. I will see you soon.